that there have been no lawful operative courts. Article 3 for ambassadors, diplomats, and consulars in relationship to treaty obligations and enforcement, and constitutional obligations in relationship to those treaties and the enforcement, and all obligations in force related to them all have been pretty much artificially neutralized, although they are lawfully still in force. And of course, many of you already know the distinction between lawful and legal. And while we won't go into that because we really want to get into the heart of some of these matters to encourage many of you to stay strong under the pressures that are being brought to bear on the people, because the fact, as we've been saying to you, particularly we've been reinforcing it for the last few years, for people to recognize that all masks are off. And when we have said that, in these last couple of years, we are acknowledging the divine evolutionary nature of us coming under a new, or what you'll call a brighter energy of the Aquarian constellation. And of course, that energy disallows much of the corruption of the priesthood that was constructed under the Piscean energy constellation that we are leaving. And that's aside from the fact many of you all know that this firmament has passed through the Futon belt, and you have a different energy also from the sun relative to our position in relationship to the sun. And this has much to do why the dark priesthood has put so much focus on having people argue among each other on a point of distraction as to whether the firmament is flat or round, etc., to divert you from paying attention to the fact of the matter is that they're wrongfully and corruptedly governing you and misgoverning you on your land, with the also intent of extinguishing you under genocide and then claiming your estate. I want to remind you, I want to go to the law book and read estate for those of you who, because we're so busy sometimes fighting back in our different methods and ways to counter the corrupt operations that is almost absolutely apparent. As a matter of fact, the hybrid Europeans are so contemptuous, and they're also so upset that people are waking up, that they're not even doing what you call, although they've always maintained it, they're not doing so much as you would call their covert programming. They're actually being more open with their abuses of the people. And even at this point of the game, they're even sacrificing many of their own in order to maintain or try to regain a lot of power and influence that they've had over the nation states of the world. And as you all know, one of the policies of the Roman Curia members to the nature of maintaining their power in the conquest of the Unum Sanctum conquest issues is to approach everything from the perspective of not allowing moral or ethical principles interfere with their pre-prescribed operations. And so I'm going to read. I first want to read a state to you, as we were saying earlier, so that you can keep in mind that many of our people's concepts about estate is absolutely incorrect. And so I'll give it to you in short. And so keep in mind the ancient and modern jurisprudence that you will find in Bouvier's dictionaries, Henry Campbell Black's dictionaries, etc., are rooted in ancient and modern jurisprudence. So when many people think that many of these established principles are contemporary, the concept would be wrong. And then you must also remember that the jurisprudence principles actually come from the ancient Sabian Moors via many of the Berber Gypsy tribes coming up and out of Africa on both sides of the water, etc. And so these principles are ancient. And so to remind you, because many of our people, because of the Freudian animal husbandry training, had been fooled into thinking that many of the primal positive law jurisprudence principles have their origin with hybrid Europeans, which is absolutely not true. This is again why it is important, as we reminded you over the years, when you're looking at European history, you got to remember we lost Europe in the early to the mid 1800s, and a lot of the historical context that we have adopted in the name of education is actually that animal husbandry training in order to write us out of history and to write the hybrid European into history. And this is where you get even the tradition of the hybrid European referencing the Aboriginal peoples, impoverished communities here as ghetto, which actually comes from the Ibri, which is falsely referred to as Hebrew, Yetta, which was the wealthy areas in Iberia, which is now known as Europe, which is the control or under the estate of the Moors, who have been genocided out. And of course, many of you who know, and many of you who are scholars, can go into a lot of available history and documents, a history like Jose Pimente Bay. You can go into Jolie Rogers, George Massey. What's the Hybrid Brothers book, Ancient and Modern Britons 1 and 2, and of course you already know that the Danes and the Dubs and the Moors and the Picts are all Moors, and this is why when you do any really just basic research into Iberian history, and of course this has much to do as to why when they speak of Europe, they rarely will tie Iberia with it, because they don't want you to think or retie yourself to Moorish history, because that's a deliberate separation, because you're talking about jurisdictional powers and also the true Europeans. Was there a question, Dr.
No, I just wanted to add something to what you just said. When you talked about the ancient Brits and
ancient and modern
Brits versus the modern Brits, and how you said genocided out, but one of the things they did, they bred out a lot of the melanation and
this is where you're talking about the hybrids,
right? But there was a lot of breeding with with them, and eventually, you know how you bleach out whatever was there. But what I wanted to say as a correlation is that what we're seeing today, with all of the push for the crossbreeding, so to speak, with with the melanated man, with so you've seen the melanated man, but the melanated woman, woman with the hybrid European, you're seeing it more and more, like they're doing what they did in Australia, deliberately figured out how many generations it would take to bleach out, the Aboriginal.
With the problem that, and that's absolutely true. With the problem that they're having is that the Canaanite Moabite gene is so strong that it always dominates. And this is another reason why they've been very adamant on altering and modifying the DNA, which many people need to understand. This is why they have really invented what they call the jab, and also put in it, among other things, fetal tissue, in order to imply that the people are cannibalizing, etc. Also, it changes your DNA, and also for many people, and which we've talked about, many of you have experienced, that there's graphene oxide. However, the issue of the estate and the genocide, deliberate genocide, is always expressed among all of the politicians, the so-called lawyers, esquires, etc. And I want you all to remember this. Is this level enough to be read?
Uh, yes, you can bring it down just a
Do I
little,
need?
just right there.
All right. You all read this carefully
Bring it up a little bit.
and write this down.
There. There you go.
Read this, and this is the Silent Weapons Executive Order 11490. This was done during the Johnson administration. This is right after they assassinated Kennedy. Keep that in mind. Now, this is their policy, and this is for many of the people who keep forgetting that we're under occupation, and also many people who, rather than try to heal the nation, they're getting this scenario of creating a new nation, which cannot be done. The nation must be healed, etc. And I think because of the heavy and tedious work that's involved in the reality of what we're actually dealing with, that many people lack the courage to and the perseverance to continue the struggle, because many of them have been spiritually and politically and economically broken. And of course, that's part of the agenda of the Unum Sanctum operations, etc. So for you to keep in mind and not forget, when you're talking to members of the Bar Association, this is what they are reading secretly, along with the politicians and the council people and the mayors and the pseudo governors and the alleged senators and congressmen for the United States Corporation Company, all of who have different positions of what you call administrative clerk powers, etc., assigned for the enforcement of the Unum Sanctum operations. This is their security page that is shared among all politicians, all lawyers, all esquires, all attorneys, but never made public, which is also why our people who don't understand the real operations often get frustrated when they're dealing with these so-called U.S. agencies and keep failing to get, quote unquote, justice. And then you'll see many of our people making statements over the years, no justice, no peace, and things like that, making posters and T-shirts with those statements on it, and they are thinking that they're appealing to these people's morals and ethical side, not comprehending the real politics. So this is their position. Is this clear? And many of you are looking, take a snapshot so that you can pull this up later on your phones or your computers.
There. No.
And then I'll read it. Security. And I'll read the instructions that is given to all the politicians that you have been trusting and voting for. And it says, Operations Research Technical Manual, TM-SW7905.1. You can start on page 3 or on page 57. And in one of our recent treatises here, we did go into 57. We're going to go into page 3, security. And keep in mind, all politicians, all lawyers, all attorneys, all bar members, all congressmen, all senators, all governors have this as their political operations. When they're doing any legislation, presenting any bills, this is their ultimate end, irregardless of what appears to you. It is patently impossible to discuss social engineering or the automation of a society, i.e., the engineering of social automation systems, quote unquote, silent weapons, on a national or worldwide scale without implying extensive objectives of social control and destruction of human life, i.e., slavery and genocide. This manual is in itself an analog declaration of intent. Such a writing must be secured from public scrutiny. Otherwise, it might be recognized as a technically formal declaration of domestic war. Furthermore, whenever any person or group of persons in a position of great power and without the full knowledge and consent of the public uses such knowledge and methodology for economic conquest, it must be understood that a state of domestic warfare exists between said person or groups of persons and the public. The solution of today's problems requires an approach which is ruthlessly candid, with no apologizing over religious, moral, or cultural values. You have qualified for this project because of your ability to look at human society with cold objectivity and yet analyze and discuss your observations and conclusions with others of similar intellectual capacity without a loss of discretion or humility. Such virtues are exercised in your own best interest. Do not deviate from them. Welcome aboard, page 4. This publication marks the 25th anniversary of the Third World War, called the Quiet War, quote unquote, being conducted using subjective biological warfare fought with silent weapons, quote unquote. This book contains an introductory description of this war, its strategies, and its weaponry. May 1979, 74-1120. This is their security page, and this is why this is not talked about in public. This is essentially, as it has been for them, what is known as a top secret document. And of course, people get frustrated, like as you see, you'll have people among our own that over the years will have meetings and they will talk about the packing of the POW camps or prison systems with our people predominantly, and talk about the unfairness of it, and immediately get misdirected into what we call the fake race paradigm argument and prejudice argument, which was designed to divert the people from the fact that these people that you've been calling government are actually waging war on the people, and their positions have no place for moral or ethical or cultural considerations. However, from a political perspective, one of their main objectives for political operations is a strategy of continuously doing what is known as colored or colorable legislation and legacy operations to convince the people that they're doing something on behalf or for the good of the people under the jurisdiction of the de facto United States government and its subdivisional agencies, all of which, including the legislation, are actually run by Roman Curia members, 99% of whom are members of the British Accredited Registry in violation of both treaties and constitutions. And as many of you know, and particularly many of you who are scholars, etc., are very well aware of the original Article of Amendment 13, often referred to as the 1320, and also with the nobility section, whereas members of the British Accredited Registry were disallowed to hold any office under the jurisdiction of the Republic Order of the States United, commonly referred to as United States, etc. And so all of those things have been breached long time ago, and this is where we have to remind you all every once in a while to keep in mind the British Act, or the England Act of England 1871, which you know in your congressional records and in the House journals as the Organic Act of Congress 1871. And with those who have been telling the people, particularly of late, which we've been telling people for years, because they're being forced to admit it, that the United States is a private foreign trafficking corporation. And the problem that you have with the instrumentalities, the bottomry instruments that they have been perpetrating against the world in order to create what they would call a reserve currency operations on fungible bond systems issued mainly from 55 Water Street, etc., are at the heart of their U.S. Treasury bond system that has been the foundation of creating what they know, or what you've been hearing as the U.S. reserve currency operations, which is in dire straits right now, because as we have told you in the last 7 or so years, we've reminded you that that there will become a feedback loop, which you're seeing right now, where the rest of the world, due to the fact of the criminality, and it has damaged so many nation states, that that they have decided to come together to counter Rome's army, etc., and resist certain trade operations with the U.S. corporation in order to bankrupt some areas of it, which are all controlled actually from the Vatican. So when you're talking about any corporate entity or operations operating in what is known as the Western Hemisphere, which does not necessarily mean what you'll call geographical territory, but is loosely used to refer to, as an example, England, United States, Canada, Australia, etc. All of these are referenced as Western, the Western world. But what that implies is actually Occidental